I'm going to tell you today about some work we did looking at the validity of telehealth administration of a measure called the Physical and Neurological Examination for Subtle Signs, or PANS. This work was led by a research assistant in my group, Kayla Huntington. The PANS is a motor observational task that helps us look at subtle motor functioning. And historically, it's been used in children with developmental disabilities like ADHD or autism. In my group, however, we have found that the PANS is very sensitive for detecting children with a history of traumatic brain injury, whether it is children who had a concussion and recovered, or children with more severe brain injury. And more than just that, the PANS gives us clues to how the brain is functioning and how the child may perform more broadly. Now, during the pandemic, everybody's in-person research was shut down for everybody's safety. And so we pivoted to looking at what measures we could use via telehealth, via Zoom. And the PANS has different parts. So some of it looks at repeated movements. For example, how quickly can you tap your fingers? Well, there are other parts that look at how somebody walks or their balance. Now, those parts with walking were difficult to capture via Zoom. However, we found that the repetitive and sequenced movements could be easily captured. And so we began to collect data that way. And once we were able to bring participants back into our research laboratory, we wanted to get an idea of how well scores administered virtually and scored virtually versus administered and scored in person were the same or different, to help us understand whether administering virtually was an ongoing option. And this is important because the PANS needs training to complete and to score. And if virtual administration is feasible, it's a way to disseminate the PANS more broadly while we work on training more people. And so what Kayla did was look at how well the scores aligned when somebody was administered the PANS in person. And then within a week, although typically during the same visit, we then had the child in a separate room from the administrator, from Kayla, who was doing the testing, and tested them virtually. And what we found is that overall, the PANS scores lined up very closely, such that there was no significant difference. When we break down the PANS scores to a little bit more fine-tuned, we find that one of the scores, which is not as relevant for children with concussion, but may be more important in other diagnoses, that looks at the fluidity of movement, may be harder to evaluate in this way, though we're not clear if that was a repeated measures effect, so that children, when doing this a second time in the same day, have less of this dysrhythmia, or if it's just harder to score by video because some of the lag that can be seen in telehealth. But overall, what this shows us is that administering via telehealth versus in person in general worked quite well. And this gives us confidence in combining the data that we've collected in person and virtually, and also exploring how we might be able to use the PANS more broadly through telehealth.